Sandino. I am the chair and founder of the Virginia Women in HPC, and with me today is our committee member. At the screen, you can see all the institutions that are represented: Richmond, University of Richmond, George Mason, VCU, Virginia Tech, William and Mary, Beams, Old Dominion, and the University of Virginia. And so on behalf of all our partner institutions, I want to say thank you for being here. We are really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have with Scott today. Jennifer, you can start recording anytime if you want to. So just to give you a little bit of the background, so we started the Virginia Women in HPC back on April of 2021. And we are committed to fostering and supporting women engagements and equitable representation of women in HPC. And also we welcome, all the allied members that want to be supporting women in HPC and also, the related technological fields. And Women in HPC, Virginia Women in HPC is dedicated to enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just to give you a few numbers, we were founded in April. Our first event was actually in October of 2021. And so far in our mailing list, we have 369 members, and we have a website that is alive. And actually, just this week, we got the first stickers that we're going to be distributing at our workshop that we're going to have in PERC for the Women in HPC workshop. And with that, I really want to welcome our speakers today. Our speaker is Scott Yockel, and he has graciously agreed to come and speak to our community. He is a strong advocate in the research, computing, and data field, and he's going to be talking to us today about RCD, career opportunities, family jobs, and helping us to understand a little bit more about the RCD community. With that, Scott, I would like to, welcome you and give you the space.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. All right, is that present in full screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right, working on two monitors here. So I'm Scott Yockel. I'm the University Research Computing Officer at Harvard. Today, I'm going to talk to quite a bit about what research computing and data careers are, a lot about what different groups of people that I've been involved with, some are doing to help support this profession. And a lot of this work is done through CARC. And so this is the logo that I have up here. And I'll talk a little bit about CARC as well. But let's step back first and just think about, today and things that you should think about, right? And then these are really just questions to, like, hopefully get your answer thinking about for question and answers at the end. When you think about your career, a lot of times we think about where we are going, right? You might ask yourself, where am I going? Hopefully you ask yourself what brings you joy to your job, what inspires you, who inspires you. Those are questions I ask myself a lot. I think more about the people I work with than I think sometimes about the substance. But you should also think about, and don't forget about, where you have been. What are the unique characteristics that make you the person you are? What value do you bring? What do colleagues say about your values? Sometimes I think we forget to ask our colleagues about that. And so last year, I was a part of, there's a leadership program called More Associates that's started out actually here in Boston. A number of former CIOs kind of run it. A lot of the Ivy Plus schools in the Northeast have gone through it, but it's a national program. And so one of the things that they make you do as a part of this leadership program that happens for about 9 months is you have to tell your leadership journey. So I'm going to tell you my leadership journey in the next couple of slides. And the reason why is because I never thought backwards very often. I always was very forward looking about where am I going? I didn't think about where I have been. And the reason why this is an important thing is you start to think about what are the leadership qualities that you've gained along the way, and what are the ones that you should, focus in on. And so I'll first tell you a little bit about me in the process of doing this. And my first computer was in the early 90s. And actually, the thing that having the first computer at home was because it was for my dad's office. He was an independent, had his own business, and he worked in our house. And so over the summer, like I got to experience firsthand my dad's work ethic. And I think that work ethic always carried with me. So the other thing, my first job, even before that, was actually a soccer referee. So from the age of 12, I've actually had a job. I refereed soccer starting at under sixes and made it all the way to refereeing things like state championship, high school, regional college tournaments. And one of the things that I learned early on in that space is when you are a child trying to command a bunch of other children, presence matters a lot, right? And as I was commonly refereeing at the similar ages, like when I was refereeing these college tournaments, I was in college, right? So presence matters a lot. And the thing that refereeing always teaches you is to own your mistakes. So these are all leadership qualities that I didn't realize I was learning early on in my life that are really important for your character as you go forward. So then I jump into like what happened in college, right? So I went to Oklahoma Baptist University in Oklahoma, where I grew up. Then I went to University of North Texas for a Ph.D. And then at that point, prior to going to college, to graduate school, I didn't really have any plans beyond like just getting my chemistry degree and moving on and working in a lab. And so this concept of feed forward is really important in a leadership quality. And so my PhD advisor really spoke words of encouragement to me like nobody had at that point when I was an undergraduate. And in doing so, it led me to go to graduate school. So I went to graduate school, and she actually went there, and I worked with her at University of North Texas. And that's where I was exposed to computational chemistry. And that's where I learned about, computer systems and things like that. And then also went on then to Northwestern for a postdoc. Two things that I learned there that I think are important is don't forget that sometimes when you fail, it's the tenacity in your character that brings you through, right? There were times in my PhD work where I failed some exams that like would have set me back or kicked me out of the program, but I had the tenacity to somehow come back from that, right? And Northwestern, when I was looking for faculty jobs, it was the 2008-2009 housing crisis that caused the economic downturn where there were no faculty jobs. So the tenacity to continue on looking for jobs outside of that space led me into the field I'm in now, right? So what happened then is that I transitioned actually back to the University of North Texas. The person who was my mentor, it taught me all about kind of like Unix and all that kind of stuff. I knew that he was retiring and they were opening up a larger and bigger facility. And I landed at University of North Texas for about 5 or 6 years and transitioned to Harvard. It was more of the ideal position. It was focused on HPC. I was focused on engaging with faculty. And then that led me to the trajectory of then becoming the director when the previous director left. And then my scope changed beyond HPC, also running virtual machines, running storage systems, engaging with all the different core facilities and their computing pipelines. And so it just kind of continued to change. And in that space of the director is also when I started engaging a lot more in things like CARC and CASC and other organizations and using kind of my leadership skills that I had gained to like be a part of other organizations. One of the things that I learned in this process that I'll say is that leading change is very hard. You inherit culture and it's not easy to change sometimes. And there are critical points along your trajectory when you make career changes. So like for me, like one of the things I learned in this director role change is because I was interim director and now managing the managers I was then used to be lateral to, right? They were my partners. Now I'm supposed to manage them. There's a window of opportunity where if you don't make change and don't enact some clear changes, then you kind of lose this opportunity to make a big difference early on, right? And so it diminishes your ability in the future. So that was a hard lesson learned. And then recently I transitioned to University Research Computing Officer, which is a role that I created for myself. I moved out of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences and into the CIO's office. And the reason why is that we had a lot of new programs that were coming. Services like high performance computing and storage all existed. There were cost models. They were doing well within the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. The new services that I wanted to focus on were things that I had gotten grants for, like the Northeast Storage Exchange, which is kind of like an internal cloud storage inside of MGHPCC, the NERC, which is the actual computing part of the cloud, which is another grant. We also, the staffing stuff I'll talk about had rolled out. Anyways, the other kind of thing is I always have had strategic vision in my head, but I realized that by not writing it out in a much more formal way, it's very challenging for leadership to always keep track of the directions you're going. So that's my leadership journey, some things I've learned along the way. And now we'll switch gears. And we can talk more about that later when you have questions. So if you don't know what CARC is, it's Campus Research Computing Consortium. They do a lot of advocacy of developing research computing and data as a profession. There's lots of different groups and stuff, which I'll show you on the next page. A couple of things that I'll say is that it's really the posture of CARC that the things that are created, they support activities and the activities are community owned. It just tries to help provide the scaffolding around making those things successful, right? And so with that, you'll see that it always partners with a number of different organizations as it does different kind of activities and projects and publications and stuff. So quickly, I just have like 2 slides on CARC. How is it organized as a group? It's because it's about close to 2,000 people that are involved in CARC at this point. There's this concept called the People Network, and the People Network is like a virtual forum. There's different tracks based upon your interests, and there are presentations that happen. So it's like a year-round kind of floating conference that happens. And for those who are on the leadership side, the strategy and policy-facing track is relatively new. It happens once a month in concert with colleagues at like EDUCAUSE and CAS. And then there's this idea of working groups and interest groups. So working groups have a formal charter. It's like lightweight one-pager that says, what are your goals? What are your timelines? What are your products that you're going to try to create? So there's been things that spun up that create something and they spin back to an interest group, which is just kind of more of a discussion group. And then new ones have come up. And so this workforce staffing and student workforce things are relatively new. So if you haven't heard about those, definitely look to get engaged in those if those are the things that you're interested in. And then there's some groups that help the whole of the organization operate, right? So engagement and logistics and stuff. So now we're going to change gears and talk a little bit about, research computing and data as a career. So for quite some time, like it's known, there's a national shortage in IT in general when it comes to staffing. It's particularly acute in research computing and data. You can ask almost every institution, is it easy to fill the open recs that you have? It's not, right? Is it easy to keep the people in your, that recruit and retain your staff? It's not easy, especially in places like Boston or in Chicago or the San Francisco area, like any area that has a big city where you have lots of other technology and research type of things that exist. It's really hard to compete in that. The other aspect that's challenging is that there's not a lot of understanding of what is the profession. So there's not a lot of feeder stock of people reaching out and coming to this. At a CARC retreat one time, we were asked by our facilitator, what does success look like when you talk about professionalization? Dana Brunson from Internet 2, she's like, I want the high school guidance counselors to know that this is a profession. And then I actually spoke up and said that like I was really proud that my daughter, in a conversation with her friends, this was when she was I think a 3rd grader, was actually able to articulate that my dad is the like research and computing guy at Harvard. Like she knew what I did, and the fact that most of her friends didn't even know what their parents did for work, right? So I think it's a thing like that that we need to make a cultural change, and so that's part of what this work and stuff is doing, right? And then the other thing, there's some more rudimentary aspects of it, is that we all mostly feel that this occupation is different than the administrative and enterprise IT. And it's different than purely a research in a specific discipline, right? It is definitely in this boundary between purely research and purely IT, because we do a lot of things in a different modality, I think, than enterprise does. Anyways, so these are the types of things and the reasons driving why we'd want to professionalize, right? So throughout this talk, I'm going to use this timeline to give you a little bit of the history of what's happened. And some of these I'll dive into deeper, some I won't. So the ones I won't, I'll just start on. So early on, the concept that a facilitator, right, didn't even exist, didn't exist as a term we used, right? So this is the NSF funded a program called the Advanced Cyber Infrastructure Research, Education, and Facilitation. In that work, they started to provide data and metrics back. So it's a consortium of like 6 universities, and Harvard was one of them, along with 5 others. But it's been a long time. I can't recall 5 now. Anyhow, the outcome of it was that there's an art to facilitation. It's not a science. And also that the people supporting researchers doing computation is equally as important as the amount of funding that we put towards the infrastructure itself, right? So if you have infrastructure and people don't know how to use it, they can't get science done, right? They can't do research done. So after that, then a group got together with an NSF funded one of these RCN grants, so Research Coordinating Network grant. And there were about 3 different meetings with research computing directors and organizational sociologists to think about what is the cyber infrastructure profession, or most of the time we just call it research computing and data at this point. But CI is what exists in the vernacular of the NSF, so that's what we use a lot of times. And then the outcome of that was this concept of a fate, like where we face different things as individuals when we describe our roles, right? And so we'll dive into that. So that concept existed in 2017, about that same time as when CARC was, conception of CARC was created, to kind of follow on from the work that ACIRF, but make it broader. And then I'll dive into a little bit more deeply. We had a workshop in 2018 that I helped lead. And that was kind of our first kickoff of any workshops and stuff that CARC had done. So at that point, it was like the idea of what are the job elements? What does a career look like? And is this facing concept, like, does that hold water? So before that, in part of that RCN meetings, one of the things that I learned about is that in creating a profession, like a lot of times we think of like medicine or law as a profession, right? There's a hierarchy of organization and activities in different places that you go. But when we think about that in place for the medical profession or the law profession, right? Like there's a bar. It's an for the law school, right? Or for the law, you have to pass a certain threshold, right? It's very exclusionary in that sense. You keep people out because you want just a very small number of people to be in that profession. But that's not what we want in research computing. It's completely the opposite of that, right? That goes against one of our problems. And so the idea from the organizational sociologists is like, well, how far down this ladder do we go? And we kind of settle in this in the space of kind of halfway, right? We need to establish that they're a professional organization, right? An association. Should CARC be that? It's not really decided yet if that should be it or not. We do want to formalize and disseminate knowledge based upon research IT. We want there to be a formal knowledge base of that. We want to implement education programs for professionals, for managers. Do we want to establish it as an academic program, right? So now we're getting into like the next phase of it. And probably not, probably not at this point at least, right? Do we want to create it as a graduate degree program and go further? That's probably not where we want to start, because that would start to become more exclusionary in that space. So this is a strange place to be and also make it look like a profession, right? Because you don't have degree programs, you don't have degree granting things. So, but if you also think back to some of our largest tech companies like Google and Amazon, they don't require the last steps either in any of their jobs. They actually have their own education programs, right? And teach people more practical things. So when we talk about professionalization, we're talking about how we organize ourselves from to be a practitioner, right, to provide services, and how we are distinct in our occupation, and how if we are distinct in our occupation, we should then also be part of scholarly research, meaning people study us, we study ourselves, and think about the development of us. So in the professionalization working group, kind of an overreaching goal that we've had for a number of years is really to disseminate different frameworks, approaches, models that help elevate research computing and data as a high value career path, right? So we've done that through different ways, and that's what I'll talk about for the rest of the day. And the whole purpose of that is attracting, retaining, and diversifying their talent that come into this group. So I'm going to go through some of this kind of really fast. I didn't realize I had clicked so many times on that one. Sorry. So in the workshop that we had, the goal was really to solidify what distinguishes people who are working primarily facing researchers versus systems versus software and data. How are their roles different? Are we going to develop specific roles around these? Because at this point in time in 2018, most of us had these really generic job descriptions like IT specialists, or something like that. Or they were a mixture of like system program analyst, those kinds of roles. And those are not helpful in your long-term trajectory because it does not distinctly say what you do. And I think that's one of the most important takeaways that you get from today is it's really important that your job description is updated every couple of years and says what you do, because that's your path to promotion, right? So if we don't keep track of what you do and you do everything and everybody does everything, there is no hierarchy that HR can look at, right? And so that's a really important. So this was our first attempt at thinking about like, how are these roles different? What are the responsibilities that these people do? And so this is like a really funny set of graphics that we came up with back then in a workshop. But when you think about a systems-facing person, there's a spectrum. You can have people all the way from the data center side to people who are just looking at security, privacy, and partnerships with companies and vendors and other technology providers. A lot of times we see ourselves kind of in this middle area. Not very many institutions does the high performance computing people have to also take care of the data center. And so you kind of find yourself in the middle. But at some point you could be systems facing and only do things in the cloud and you don't worry about any of the physical part of it at all. And then researcher facing roles, a really very different set of skills than you would have, and different set of roles and responsibilities than those who are doing the system, right? Once you engage with researchers, there was this idea of co-create and co-learn that became really important to the group, and we've used that term over and over. The idea that you are regularly providing communication to the campus, you facilitate outcomes with both the systems folks and also other technology partners, maybe on the software side. But I think one of the most important parts is you're actively solving problems with the researchers, right? You enhance their learning experience. You make it easier for them to use local and other larger resources. Software and data facing at the time was considered just one thing, and now it's been split up kind of into two, but conceptually it's really the same it's just really a difference in the technology or who their stakeholders are. But as far as what's important, so one of the things is depending on who you are, different parts of this is more important. So if you came from, say, over here on the bottom left from bioinformatics, right? So bioinformatics people building pipelines and things like that have different, some maybe system administration, the software engineering are important, their workflow design is very important, but visualization probably not as important. But maybe if you're a digital humanist, then curation, archival, presentation, those things become more important. So it's really important to think about that, what the domain lens is. And then research IT leader, you have all sorts of different things that are part of your network of responsibility. Let me jump ahead here. So one of the outcomes of that was thinking of that workshop was, now that we have this guidebook, one of the things that was missing was some kind of actual framework to organize the research IT jobs for hiring, for career development, for retention. And that became a focus of kind of one of the next steps. And so these are just other themes that came out of that workshop that I think were important, and they still resonate today, is the idea of co-creation, that you're partnering with researchers. That's a very distinct difference than I think a lot of our enterprise IT colleagues, where you're creating more of a utility that the masses use, right? Where here we're kind of crafting like data pipelines specifically for that researcher, right? And trying to learn and make things different and pull things together that are similar and, and optimize them for people. So status I think this is where a lot of us, that I feel like there's a two-tier culture in university. As you already have heard, I have called this 4 different words now. I have said cyber infrastructure. I have said research computing and data. You've heard me say research IT. That's kind of hard, right? That our terminology is kind of scattered across. Anyways, so that brings us up to HR job family. So a few of us got together. We had some HR representation in our working group. So I want to first give you a couple definitions about what job function, job family, and job series are. So it's important, if you're a part of the management layer or director layer of your institution, that you really understand what makes the job family a job family, right? So at the base level, there's a job function. So like at Harvard, there are 17 different job functions, things like IT, HR, finance, research, libraries, facilities, general administration. So when you're designing a job family, it has to fit into a job function. The reason why I bring that up is that your job family also may not, even if you're in IT, doesn't mean you have to report up to IT. Like you might report in your unit to the provost or the VP of research, right? Who has a lot of research-oriented people in there, but you could still be IT as a job function. But it's the top level function at what you do. And I think it's really important to determine. And I think it's also really important because most HR systems, when they look at evaluating compensation, they do it within the job function at certain levels. They don't go from IT to research or research to IT. And so one thing that's really important for long-term career folks is most of the positions at your university that are in research are short-term. They're not long-term positions. They're mostly grant funded. So you have a high turnover. So you have a lot of entry-level people typically in those positions. So it's not a good place to compare compensation normally. So there's just some things that I've learned along the way. The job family is the top level kind of service category, if you were thinking about it in that kind of ITIL framework, right? So research computing versus the IT infrastructure, which might be your core infrastructure like networking, your physical infrastructure, maybe like long-term storage preservation. Those are like top level IT infrastructure. And then inside of that, you have a series. So series are the things that uniquely define the roles, right? And then you have levels inside of the series. And so I just described to you essentially why these series is different. Because in the past, in research computing, we were all the same, right? Which makes it very hard to create a trajectory because it's hard to define how you're making things different as you progress in your career. Inside of a series, you have different levels, entry level. A lot of us in this, so you can download the actual framework from the CARC website. A lot of the universities don't really use the entry level. They start at level 2 in the framework, just to point out. We only use level 1 for like data center technician, or we use them for like temps in the summer, like for like interns and things like that. Because they don't like it's only like 2 years of experience, meaning 2 years of even educational experience that's relevant. And it goes up from there. These typically go 2 to 4, somewhere between 2 to 3 year jumps as levels of experience combined with education as it goes up. And then I think the most important thing is that before we never had individual contributors that were equivalent to managers, right? That was a huge change that we've had. So these would be like your lead or principal architect of something, like in the system side. Maybe like a lead storage engineer or principal architect for HPC. These are pinnacle positions where you might just have one at the whole institution, and which is also a place where you'll get a lot of pushback from HR in implementing something like this, because they don't like to have just one of someone. So inside of the job family, there are things that are pretty well set, like you'll have job title, that's like the HR title. That's what was on the previous slide, like these systems professional 1, 2, 3, right? And then you have the business title. That's where you have flexibility to call it what you want. Maybe call it an RC systems, senior RC systems engineer, lead RC systems engineer, or lead storage engineer. Like that's where you get those. You have a job summary. In most institutions, the job summary is fixed for the position. You can't change it. So the template, we try to do a really good job in the template of changing a small number of words in the summary that articulate the increased level of autonomy and responsibility and leadership. Those are really important aspects of what separate off the different positions. So, yeah. And then additional skills is you can change all you need to customize that for your specific one. Things that were addressed that are really important. I talked about the non-managerial distinctness from enterprise already. Just not all jobs in your department that support research computing will be research computing jobs. Like a project manager there's a whole IT family for project management, right? Or research administration, or library, or these other types of things. Those are not in that job family intentionally, because they should be in these other ones. And then one of the things is that almost all the feedback we got is that there should be no just like minimums based upon education, like no like must have bachelor's or must have master's. There should be a combination of these things that's acceptable. It's a really important part of that. And then the reason why there's a single software and data facing is that their duties are actually very similar. It's the skills that you might require out of the different, like a research software engineer versus a data scientist, that are different. But as far as what they do and how they engage with researchers and their level of responsibility and autonomy, like all of that kind of is very similar. And then we actually have a one for a director track and have multiple different levels for directors. And it was interesting at Harvard, they don't use just a couple of things about Harvard, like they don't use that leadership stakeholder facing role at all. I talked about this pushback already, but we were able to accomplish it. And actually now, which is, I think, 5 years later from adopting the framework at Harvard, we have, I think, about 8 people who are in this like level 4, level 5 category for these functions, and they weren't before, right? So a lot of them were promoted into these spaces. And one of the things that I'll say, when you think about promoting somebody into that space as an individual contributor, lead, or a principal, you want to make them owner of like a technology or of a service, but not have to have the personnel report to them. So like they may own the technology and the implementations and the maintenance and the decisions about technology and the strategy in the future, right, about something, but they don't have to manage the people that are part of that, right? Maybe they're part of a group that has a bigger group of people. Yeah, so I'm just gonna jump ahead just because on time. So out of that 2019 framework, there was an NSF workshop that happened in the summer, few summers back, and it was a few things that came out of that was that we needed to increase awareness. So you're going to start seeing like a lot of the same themes. The job families needs to be communicated. We need to define career arcs. Needs to create a compensation career path, trajectory model. Down at the bottom, the NSF could provide funding for a national census. So that gave us ideas to actually do the census. We started the census and then we actually received funding later. It takes a long time to create a large survey. I didn't realize how long it was going to take us, but we got through it. And why is this needed? One, there's a really interesting paper about the ecosystem, if you haven't read it before, that Sharon and colleagues put out. But this is a really cool graphic that just shows like the mess and the relationships. There's so many between all the different organizations. And so we needed to understand what is our workforce, right? And so we did a national survey. We ended up with about just a little under 600 respondents, about 575 or so that were like quality, fully answered questions throughout the whole survey that we used. It was our first effort to characterize the workforce. We hadn't had such a wide survey in the past. We threw it, just to provide you a sense of data, there's about 5,000 RC professionals we estimate in the academic space. There's tons and tons of data to go through. I'm just going to open this website for a second. Actually, I'm not going to because of the time, but I implore you to go to this website. There's all the data that exists. You can explore demographics, you can explore education, you can explore a lot of different things like that about who we are as a group. There will be another survey. We're working on another survey to follow up. Some will be the same types of questions, but we want to dig deeper into some other topics. You and guys in Virginia did a good job. Massachusetts, California, but we could use a lot better representation. So also we'll need you to help spread the word, and that'll probably come out in the late fall. One of the things that we also had in the second paper was compensation. So there's a paper all about compensation that just here's a snapshot of a single figure. You can see how the change in compensation doesn't really change a lot in the individual contributor space. It does a little bit when you go to manager, obviously a director with responsibilities. It slowly goes up with years of service. But this is one of the things that we did look at is comparison to some of our industry colleagues and some publications that existed. I think a lot of the times the difference between academic salaries and salaries in industry are that we start out somewhat similar in this individual contributor space, but they drastically increase at a rate that's more than what we do. So that's something that's different about the two. And then a couple more last points. So colleagues of mine like Dana and Tom Cheatham at Utah, Patrick Smits and Claire Uzumoto, who's now retired from San Diego, we submitted a grant and got what is now called the RCD Nexus, and did a lot of work. So like half of that survey work and the data analysis on that was part of that. The other thing that I was going to point out before is that this RCD staffing workforce, student workforce, those groups grew out of that grant as well. So if you're interested in workforce development, whether it be to create a student program or think about like things that your managers could be doing for your staff, those are two really good groups to get engaged in. And the RCD Nexus Day that happens the day before PERC focuses on those as well. There's also been a lot of work on career arcs that has been started by Patrick Smits. He was with me a long time ago in the development of the professionalization working group, and then he split off and created his own career arcs. Him and Sam Porter and a few others have been really done a lot of good work. Some of their, like last year, I think it was last year, their paper was one of the awards at PERC. So a lot of good resources here. They've done some interviews. There's some other things that will come out from this group will be, they want to make like personifications of different like detailed interviews that they've had and like come up with like certain types of stories to tell. So I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for discussion, so I didn't go over all the data that's on the website, which you can look at any point. So there, quick overview. A lot of work has happened in this space. I don't claim to be an expert, but I definitely have learned a lot. And I'm always happy to share the things I've learned about the formal structures that exist, how to get promoted in an institution, what are the constraints, a lot of things like that I've learned over the years. I feel like I've had to like learn a lot about HR. And a lot of times I get asked to be a subject matter expert on other positions that, like a lot of times faculty are essentially creating a research software engineer and don't know it. And then HR will be like, is this a research software engineer? Is this a, because they don't realize there's a framework that they could use. And so we have a lot of research software engineers at Harvard that are like individual people in a single lab. Anyways.
Thank you so much, Scott. This is really great information. I do have a couple questions, but first I really want to ask the audience, anyone that might have questions, please, you can unmute yourself or you can put your questions in the chat. That will be really appreciated. And if not, the first question that I have for, yes, go ahead.
I was like, if we're short on questions, then I'll get to show you some fun data.
Yes, that's fantastic. So one of the first questions that we have is, do certain job families tend to attract more males than females? And if so, what is your advice for females to be more competitive in those job families?
Yes, and I unfortunately, we had a paper rejected from PERC when we were doing this analysis. But the problem really was that we should have submitted a large paper instead of a short paper. So it tends to be really fairly equal male-female across the board. I just want to say, like, in the positions, I should say this, the percent of the total who are male and female in our population don't skew one way or the other very much, depending on the facings. What we do find is that people who come from different backgrounds, educational backgrounds, do skew towards certain ones. And because those educational backgrounds are dominated more male or female, that's where we see some interesting kind of trends. So for example, when you think about facilitation and you think about biology or the life sciences. So life sciences are a little bit more dominated by women. And so they and also I should say the facilitation positions are more, it's more of a dominance that they will migrate to a facilitation position than they would to like a systems engineering position or something like that. So it's places like that where we see some trends and stuff. So as you get away from physics and purely like statistics and math and chemistry and towards life sciences, towards public health, we see more of a male-female, a disparity in male-female ratios than the total population. So higher number of females in the further away from physics we go. But it's also similar to the trends in the population of people in those degrees in general. So that's hopefully that makes sense what I'm explaining. We have a little bit of like figures and stuff to show that, but I didn't have them handy.
Okay.
That's where we see the trends. So when you're looking at systems, I think the other thing I will say that was from that data set that was interesting was that the number of years of experience typically is smaller for those who start into the systems engineering than the facilitation. So facilitation people typically have a larger number of years experience. So more years of schooling, more years of work and entering that space than those over here. So one of the things that we had anecdotally in our working group as a conversation is like, does that mean that women are entering the RCD workforce later because they're represented more in this facilitation space than they are the system space, and not trying to do it earlier in their career? We don't really quite crunch those numbers, but it creates those kinds of questions for us to like explore.
Looking at it.
Kind of related to that, what sort of percentages are there for leadership positions? Is it skewed more toward male or more toward female?
Yeah, it's skewed more towards male. So compare when I say skewed more towards male, I'm always talking about the mean ratio of male and female within our community, and how does that change at looking at a particular position. So yeah.
So we have a couple questions in the chat right now, Scott, and I'm just gonna read this one for everyone. So this question is from Kendra. She's asking, do you have any idea for emerging research institutions like James Madison, newly classified an R2 institution, which are trying to develop new capabilities in HPC and RCD?
Yeah. So one of the things that's most important, and I was at an institution like that. I was at University of North Texas. It was a R2 trying to become an R1. We were a group of 3 people, like me, and we used to divide up our responsibilities every semester to be like, who wants to be the systems person this year? Who wants to be the ticket and software installation? When you're small, I think it's really important that you be very specific about the services that you can do and do them well, because it's your reputation that makes a big difference. Because if you try to do too many services, you're not going to be able to do them well, right? So if you want to focus on HPC, definitely focus on it. Focus on, equally focus on the hardware aspect of keeping a nice system running, and also facilitation, helping people use the system, right? So you have to balance that. If you don't, you know, like if you overdo, say, facilitation, and you're not taking care of your system well, and there's too much outages, or you know, like it just gets overused in places and makes it clunky for another researcher, then they're not going to want to use it, right? And then the other way around, like if you're focused too much on the system side and you can't be responsive on tickets, then the other thing I will say is definitely think about a student program. So engage in the CART group about a student program. When I was at North Texas, we were able to work with the graduate school and say, we would like to have a graduate student in each of the major departments, so like biology, physics, chemistry, material science, to help be in our group. And we will pay them, and you don't have to pay them, like, because normally there would be like a TA teaching a class, right? So like a bioinformatics person teaching a wet lab, or a computational chemist teaching organic chemistry wet lab, did not make as much sense as having them with us and actually using their skills that they would use. That's a way to bolster your population of like support staff. Those are kind of my two pieces of advice in that space.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
We have another question here from Ada.
Yeah.
I will get my PhD at age 58. Congratulations. It's
Yeah.
never late. Will it be difficult to find a job at this age with a PhD degree?
I don't think that people care about what age people are. I will say, as a hiring manager, it is like when you read somebody's resume and then you see and you interview with them, it is sometimes like, oh, they're older. Like, you have that thought. There's no way around that. But I think you have to think about the way you present yourself. What have you done? I think a lot of people are always, like, in research computing, are always going to be like, do you continually want to learn, right? Because when you engage with a researcher, you need to be able to take on that problem, learn it, and then provide feedback, right? And do work. So I don't know what aspect of research computing you're interested in looking at, but like, you know, I think that's a really important part is how you approach problems, your analytical thinking skills, you know, your soft skills, your communication. You know, it's really hard in an interview, but like, does somebody know how to own a problem? You know, as an adult, like we always joke in our group, like, who are the adults? Like, who's going to take care of following up with that faculty when it's a very hard thing to do, right? And having that presence. So I think those things are all really important. Having a PhD tells somebody you understand the research plight. You understand how that operates. It also gives you the ability to speak that language of that discipline kind of broadly, right? So those are important things. And it's important to articulate that you're not stuck only in your field, right? That you've been able to support people across multiple aspects of things, right? So those are things important to convey.
Thank you, Scott. I do have a couple more questions. We have a few more minutes. I think the next question would be, so how improved is the population of women and minorities in research computing or HPC compared to, let's say, 10 years ago?
How is it?
Yeah, how improved do you think that is the population?
I can only give you something anecdotally because we've only done one survey, so I don't have a, like, how has it changed data point. That's one of the reasons that we're interested. I can say anecdotally from going to meetings, you know, so in the leadership space, go to the CASC meeting. CASC is about 100, mostly R1 institutions. There's probably only a handful of R2 institutions that are members of that organization. It's a nonprofit. It mostly advocates to the different federal agencies about research computing data programs. And then we invite them to all come to the annual meeting. That was exclusively the girl boys club for a long period of time. Even when I first went in probably 2017, I only knew 2 or 3 women that were going to be there out of 115. And now it's at least around 20, right? And so that for me is a huge shift. And the other thing that's happened in that group also is the age that attends that group has gone down quite a bit. So that's another important aspect, not just who, you know, like I think both factors are important. PERC is a relatively new conference, right? It's only been around since like 2020, I think, or 2019. So we don't have a lot of data there on that. So I'm just trying to say there's not a lot of data, but like anecdotally, when I look around the room, and I do that like on purpose, and I sometimes sit there and count, you know, and it is becoming much more equal than it used to be. The ways that we can help do that, some methodologies that I've been taught from different diversity people that have come into Harvard IT is when you have the opportunity to present and somebody else in your group could also present, think about that is a really important thing because they may not get that opportunity. So instead of me going myself, like, who else in my group could present this particular topic to the university or to the, right? That helps promote the vision that we're, you know, have other leaders besides just the person who sits there normally, right? They're like, every leader that stands up has a group of leaders behind them that help them through their day-to-day, right? So let's make sure that we show that face of people. So I think that's an important aspect. And so you can be really choosy on that. That's an easy thing to do that can help others that attend conferences or things like that see a different face up on the stage, and that's really important to identify with.
I want to check again with the audience. If anyone has another question, please feel free to unmute yourself. We have another question in the chat right now, and we have two more. Let me see that. Let me read that so that everyone can hear it. Oh, Jackie was actually adding a comment to Ada. So yeah, so to continue with some of the questions that I have, Scott, here is, what do you think about, or what would be your recommendation about cross-training between different job families in, within the RCD, and how encouraged will be that?
Yeah, so one of the things that when I was in Faculty of Arts and Sciences Research Computing, we always made all new staff do is learn how to be a user. So it's cross-training in two sense. So if they're a systems person, like they need to learn how to become a user of that system, and understand, like, does it work the same way when you're not a system admin? Like, is it as fluid as you think it is as a service? And then, I think the other thing is, I think cross-training is a good idea. I think about how to do it. And I think doing it on some kind of regular cadence, doing it early in people's stint, like at your institution in that position, is really important too. It really broadens their eyes. The other thing that can be powerful is, I don't know how you deal with tickets and all that. A lot of times there's a small group of people who are taking care of incoming tickets, and they take care of a certain percentage of them and they pass some of them off. Have a different person be responsible for looking at what those tickets say, because that gives you the most insight into how the research community sees your service. Like, where are things that could be streamlined and stuff like that. So like, there's different ways to think about cross-training than just a formal sit down lecture style, but there's these shadow opportunities that I think are important.
And my last question here is, and this is, a Gladys question. So how can, a woman in this field go about advocating for herself when it comes to those specific job classifications? How do I position myself to be able to, get myself into one specific classification because I want to continue growing? Let's say I want to go in that direction of leadership. So right. How can we position ourselves, or how we can go about that, advocating for ourselves within this now structure of job families that we have? Yeah,
so in each of these tracks, and I should put a link in the chat in a second before everybody leaves. Let me do that real fast. So in each of these tracks, I think it's important to realize that as you go up the ladder, that the idea is that you become more autonomous and you have more responsibility, and that you are able to, sorry, I'm talking and trying to do things at the same time. Okay, so here's the listen to chat. So if you haven't downloaded it before, this is a Google form who you are, because then I have to keep stats and report to NSF about who's using the frameworks and stuff. It's important to do things not just solely that are your job if you want to move up in leadership space. When I say solely not your job, think about what are other committees you can be on at your institution that represent your department, right? What are other committees that you could be on, like Women in HPC or CARC, or these other organizations that are outside your institution, right? Don't just attend them, also be a leader in those things. That is a step into leadership. If you don't have direct reports to management, to manage, it shows leadership qualities, right? You're having to organize and command things, help with a local, if you guys end up having a local physical Women in HPC workshop or something like that, you're going to have to contribute some of your time to doing things like that. And then your leadership will hopefully see, and you can come to them and say, I excel at doing this. I would like to take on this type of responsibility within the department as well, Those are the types of things. So in order to promote yourself, 40% of your role needs to be new and different to go from one to the next. That's kind of an HR policy in most places, right? So you kind of have to write your trajectory from one step to the next. And in doing that, there's only a certain number of activities that, you know, are available for you to do. You can also, you know, on the technical side, you can take courses and stuff like that, but that's not going to help you on the leadership track, right? That might help you on the systems track. So on the systems track, like, if you don't know machine learning and AI, you better learn it. You know, on the facilitation side, that's also a good thing to do. So those are things to think about.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Scott. We do have, you know, we're past the time.
Yep.
And I just really want to say thank you to the entire community that is here today. And thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us. We have posted a few resources in the chat, and we can also put those on our website. The last thing that I want to share is the next event that we're going to have coming up for our community is going to be on September 3rd. And we're going to be actually, let's see, here it is. So this is going to be on September 3rd. We're going to be actually participating with other three chapters